Welcome to Unbiased and on the Fence. I'm Shane. Well, we are exposing the hologram of deception with the Wingmakers material. Now, I talked about the fifth interview a while back, and I will have links in the pinned comment below, but not in the description. But basically, if you can go through all four interviews, but the fifth interview was the one that was released later, and a lot of the information in the fifth interview sort of pointed to the fact that the first four interviews, some of the information was theatrical or basically for the story in it, just because there's sensors, there's things put in place to hide this information and designed in a way to go in the back door of this hologram system we're in. Now, we are indeed in a designed universe. Everything about it is designed. And if you enjoy the information on the Leak Project and some of the other ones where they get into the Anunnaki and Enlil and Enki and Anu and planet Nibiru, some of the work of Zacharias Sitchin, where he talks about how the Anunnaki came to mine gold from Earth. I really enjoyed this information in the fifth interview because it tied together so much of that information. It's not exactly the same, and they don't ever really mention planet Nibiru in this material, but they do talk a lot about the Anunnaki and the Sirians and the reptilians. So a lot of this information will be familiar to you to a certain extent. So basically, you can go to the pinned comment and watch. It's about 3 hours. They go through the whole entire interview. I'll also link the PDF of what you're looking at right here. That's got the entire, there's 81 pages. I'm looking at here, 81 pages in the PDF. You can, and there's some pictures in there too, but you can go through and check it out yourself if you like. But I don't want this to be 3 hours long, so I want to summarize, because I think a lot of the important information can that you can miss if you're sort of looking at the whole thing, I think ties into the Mandela effect and things like that. But sort of my caveat to start out with here is that we have programming in place that's designed to make us just automatically reject information. And I saw this happen the other day on the program. I didn't notice it when it was happening live, but as I was watching it back, I was reading some information, and I saw someone leave a comment that sorry, I'm out of here, I'm a Jesus sort of girl. And other people began to chime in and say, oh, we believe in Jesus too, and somebody said they were a Jesus freak and things like that. So I got to understand that not everyone knows things I've said in the past. Jesus is my hero. I believe that his message has been distorted. They even bring that out in this material I'm about to go over, of how they used Jesus and manipulated some of his message to serve their own purposes. So if at any point you feel, and it's the same way with the Mandela effect, have you had any changes where you noticed something changed, but the new version had an oddly familiar feeling about it? I mean, you knew it wasn't that way, but the new way had something familiar about it. Well, it's the same way with this. This information resonates with me, but I feel something on the inside of me wanting to reject parts of it. So just understand that we have programming in place designed to make us want to reject anything that goes against the status quo or what we've been programmed to believe. And that is that everything in the deception of life and everything is based in separation. So before you turn it off when you hear something or anything like that, just keep in mind it may be the programming making you want to navigate away from it. And we've seen this with anybody that sees the Mandela effect. You've seen it when you try to talk to other people about it. They just automatically, you can see that programming kick in. And this really made a lot of that stuff make sense, because it brought it all into focus at how you can see that programming at work when you try to talk to people about the Mandela effect. There's really, I can't think of any other way that this stuff can be explained other than what this material is bringing out about pre-programmed information, programming that makes us want to reject things that go against the deception, the hologram of deception. So keep that in mind before you tune it out, because I think this is an important time. If you are someone that's experiencing the Mandela effect, you've probably it talks about the people that there's people that's put in place to help bring down this illusion, this deception, and you could be part of that. And if you turn it off too soon, you won't realize how you're supposed to be part of helping bring down this deception. And we need as many people as possible, because an idea can be placed into the global consciousness, if you will, if only enough people. You have to reach critical mass, is the way they explain it. You have to have enough people that can insert the idea, understand it, begin to practice the sovereign integral process of the I am, we are, because everything, every group, religion, belief, and everything in this hologram of deception, this programmed reality, is based in separation. Even the best, what you would think of as the best religions, and even the message of Jesus was twisted into this message of that at the heart of it, it has a separation message in it. So keep that in mind. I felt those things too, that natural want to sort of turn the information off or reject it right away. So just be aware of that, because I think that's important. It talks about how the Atlanteans, most of us have heard of Atlantis and the lost city of Atlantis and the Atlanteans and all that. But basically it talks about how the Atlanteans were on Earth, and Anunnaki came around needing to mine gold. But at the time the planet was more etheric. It was densifying. It wasn't as dense as it is right now. So they had to create, basically they called them uniforms, but it was the human 1.0 that was basically a suit that they put the Atlanteans, at first they volunteered to help out. So the Atlanteans were infinite beings, and they put on these uniforms, which were basically the first human beings, 1.0s, and they were clones. They didn't reproduce and things like that. So what the Anunnaki, along with the Sirians and the serpent race, realizes that they could sort of enslave the Atlanteans. They could, they're infinite beings that they could place inside these uniforms, program them, and this was done by Anu of the Anunnaki, and Marduk, he was the programmer. And so the human 1.0s would mine the gold, and basically after their bodies expired, they would remove them. They had the astral realm, or what we would think of as the afterlife, that was all part of the controlled or the created reality. Everything from our DNA all the way to the edge of the universe is all part of this created reality, even the afterlife. And so they would put them in this holding place, sort of like you would think of as purgatory, until the next body was ready, and then they would insert them into it. But at some point they came up with the human 2.0s, which was designed, they were designed to reproduce. It just made the whole process more automatic. The serpent race was basically here to provide sustenance for the humans, food and whatnot. The actual uniform was designed primarily by the Sirians. So these three races basically joined forces to enslave the Atlantean infinite beings. They were basically equals, but the Atlanteans, they describe them as being a little bit naive. They didn't imagine that there could be such a conspiracy to enslave them. So they sort of went in willingly. They were all on board with doing this. They just didn't realize that it meant the end of their sovereignty as they knew it. But at some point, Anu, the leader of the Anunnaki, they had mined enough gold. He decided that he liked the idea of them enslaving humans. What they found out is that Earth's core, there was something special about the core. It allowed for manifestation. So they figured out a way to take and replicate Earth's core and put it in other planets. And these three races wanted to see if they could continue what they did on Earth on other planets. So that was basically their motivation. Even though they had mined enough gold, it was sort of seductive for Anu to think of himself as a god, to place himself up as a god over these created beings and to keep them enslaved. So when Jesus came along to sort of try to reveal the truth of what was really going on, most of the time they just locked him away until they rotted in prison or whatever. But in the case of Jesus, Jesus had such a huge effect. Before Jesus came along, God wasn't the loving God. He was the angry God that people were scared of going against from the time of the Garden of Eden. They created this whole scenario, the idea of sin and the fall of mankind, and that we lost our place and all that. This was all created, but they really weren't what we would typically think of as the first source of everything, the creator of all. They were simply the creators of this illusion that we find ourselves in now. Now, it's very real to us. It's all we have ever known. We've fallen so deep inside this illusion that we feel like it's real. Even the afterlife, they've created the heaven, the hell. They had to have a Satan on the world stage because that created the whole idea of polarization. It made you want to live the virtuous life and follow the loving God, and it gave them the opportunity to take the message of Jesus and twist it more than what it was. So Jesus was the way, the truth, and the life. I just want to reiterate that. Please don't split and say that, you know, I'm a Jesus kind of person and this is not like Jesus. Jesus tried to help us see this deception. Jesus tried to help us out of this hologram of deception that we find ourselves. But we weren't ready for his message, and that's sort of why they released this message in the way they did. They had the first 4 interviews that they released back in the 90s, late 90s, and then they had this 5th interview that I'm going into here that wasn't released until 2014. This basically talks about all the things I'm bringing up right now, but let me get to some of the parts I wanted to read. You can watch the video and see all of this, but I'm just going to I went through and I've highlighted the main points. The human 1.0s were the ones that were, they didn't have the power to reproduce or whatever, so they came up with the human 2.0s. This was the stage where the humans could self-reproduce. And when this happened, some of the Anunnaki impregnated female women, humans, and brought in their bloodlines to the human species. This began the variations. This began the idea that humans were no longer clones. The concern, however, was that the human 2.0s might become too powerful and self-aware. What if the Atlantean power source became aware that it was an infinite being? This was when Anu decided that he should be God. Humans needed to have a lord or ruler over them, so it was clear that they were inferior to an external ruler. This was a key part of their program of indoctrination. Working with Marduk and the Sirians, they created the environment of Eden and created the paradigm of Eve as the instigator of the fall of humanity. This was, you might say, Act 1 of Anu as God. It was staged to provide human 2.0s with a clear sense of an external authority, and that they were expelled from paradise because they tried to be self-realized. It was like rebuking humanity with the fist of an angry creator who wanted his creation to remain identified with their human uniform. Kind of like saying, do not think for a moment that you can be like me. The Wingmakers wrote that this actually happened kind of like the Bible said. The God of the Bible is the Anunnaki Lord Anu. To really understand the grand portal, you have to understand this evolutionary process, and the only way you can understand it is to go back to the beginning of the human race. The original goal was the acquisition of gold, but when the Atlanteans rejected Anu, he began to conspire with the Sirians. It was just before the flood that Anu discovered that the gold he'd mined was sufficient. He didn't require more. However, the notion of being a god over the Atlanteans was seductive. The sirians and serpents felt that the idea of enslaving infinite beings in planet ecosystems was their invention. They had something that was totally unique. They were creator gods, and every other race could be ensnared in a similar type of vessel. They began to do just that, enslave other races. You see, the Earth had a unique quality to its core. The core was of extreme interest to the Anunnaki when they first visited Earth. It was this core that created the gravitational field that enabled the planet to become fully physical in such a way that it could support physical life. Of course, other conditions needed to be present too, but it was this core that was the real key. Working with the sirians and serpents, they began to do the same enslavement on other planets. They replicated the core of the Earth and engineered a method of implanting this core on other planets. They were essentially terraforming a planet by cloning and installing Earth's core. The functional implants of the human interface are perfectly integrated with the human vessel. They operate seamlessly, so seamlessly we do not know that they are not us. We have no choice in a way. We think our thoughts and emotions are us, that this space-time is what our thoughts and emotions exist in. Even the thought of a God, heaven, hell, soul, masters, all of these, they're part of the program. It is integrated in both the dimension of the earth plane and the afterlife. The afterlife is part of the deception. Human consciousness is the key to suppressing an infinite being. Human consciousness, or the triad of consciousness, is composed of three interactive layers. The first layer is universal mind, or unconscious, and this forms the link between the individual human and the entire species. This layer is what enables everyone to see what everyone sees, feel what everyone else feels, know what everyone else knows. It is the perfect way to unify a species in separation. In fact, that is the way we feel unification, through the unconscious mind. The next layer of unconscious is the genetic mind, or subconscious. This forms the link between the individual and their family tree or genetics. This is where bloodlines are expressed. And then there's the conscious mind. This is the unique individual perception and expression, what most of us call our personality and character, which is built on this layer. The conscious mind of the individual is heavily influenced by the genetic mind, especially between birth and the age of 7 or 8. By that time, the influence is all-encompassing. Remember that the Anunnaki created the biological form, the body. The Sirians created the functional implants, and Marduk executed the programming of these functional implants so they would evolve along a programmed path, leading to the return of Anu. This was expressed in hierarchical structures of humanity that speaks of God and masters in religion and esoteric texts. The whole principle that was behind this entire endeavor could be summed up in one word: separation. Everything exists in separation within the earth plane and its afterlife planes as well. But according to the wing makers, what is real is that we are all imbued with equality and oneness, not through the unconscious mind, which only links us in separation, but rather through the life essence that is us, and this life essence is sovereign and integral. It is I am, we are. No one is above, no one is below, no one is better, no one is lesser. To step out of this illusion, it requires each of us to wake up and stay awake. It's not reading words that will change this. It's the profound nature of new behaviors, because these behaviors signal that our consciousness layers are understood as separate from who we really are. We have to operate as I am, we are. You see, the grand portal is a way to synchronize humanity to a new inception point where it is living in the expression of oneness and equality, sovereign and integral. I am, we are. It is a way for humanity to move from separation, which was its previous inception point, the one that generated Human 1.0 and 2.0. Human 3.0, sovereign integral, will have a new inception point, and the reason for the grand portal was to enable synchronization, because how can you have a network of equality and oneness if the beings were not synchronized? It is the redefinition of human identity and expression as I am, we are, from a human perspective. The wing makers do not see humans as lesser entities, but simply beings with inception points that enslaved them. It is not a judgment that humans are worthless or bad or sinful or weak or needy, None of those things. Humanity needs a new start, a point in which they can synchronize in one realization, and that is the expression of I am, we are, living those words as behavior. Each individual being is responsible for this. God or source intelligence isn't going to come down from the heavens and correct human faults or obstacles. Humans need to take responsibility for this. It's not easy. The wingmakers write about the heart virtues as the behavioral construct for this time, and how these words can be applied and lived. Appreciation or gratitude, compassion, humility, forgiveness, understanding, and valor or courage. It is the combination of nowness, being in the now, and apply these words in our behaviors. It's being impeccable in this practice. The unconscious mind is a doorway into all beings. These behaviors go out to all beings. They support the building of the sovereign integral network human 3.0, the replacement of separation consciousness of human 2.0. So this is the application of insertive behavior, which is to say, I will insert these behaviors in my nowness. They will become the palette of my behavioral choice. The other half of this equation is the resistive behaviors, and these are withdrawing and stopping behaviors that support separation and deception. These are active resistances, saying no to behaviors of your own and others without judgment. Again, whether you operate in the insertive or resistive behavioral mode, you are affecting the whole. You either support oneness and equality, the I am, we are, or you support separation and deception. The starting point of behavior or expression is in the now. This is the creative nerve center. Every single now is a potential to support oneness and equality in this world and help birth the human 3.0 and the sovereign integral network. There are humans here who are designers of the new unconscious mind that will bridge human populations everywhere on the planet to feel and express equality and oneness. It will connect humanity in the I am, we are consciousness instead of the separation consciousness. It will not be based on hierarchy. That deception is coming down. But there is programming within the human interface where the functional implants are networked as a system that will tune out certain information. A person will hear it, but they will not act on it. They will hear it, but they will object to it. They will hear it, but they will not share it. All of these programs were created, not originally, but they can be upgraded. The program can be updated with new instructions. It makes cracking into this reality, exposing it for what it truly is, a very difficult proposition. It's important to know what's behind the deception, to look with sober eyes on the truth. And it may not be a beautiful picture, to be sure, but how else do you realize your own truth until you know the truth of the big picture? So however screwed up it seems, it is an inception point for the individual to redefine themselves. The part of the new picture that is promising is that we exist infinitely despite the fact that we have been suppressed and enslaved. We also can play a role in supporting this redefinition of the human being through our thoughts and behaviors. And maybe most importantly, we have the wing makers, our future selves, providing us with evidence that I am, we are, prevailed. Remember, everyone inside our universe is part of this deception, whether they know it or not. There are 4 classes of beings. 1, those who know the deception and are actively supporting it. 2, those who know about the deception but are unwilling to do anything about it. 3, those who don't know the deception and are unknowingly supporting it. And 4, those who know about the deception and are actively trying to step out of the deception and engineer a process for everyone else to do the same. That's it. It doesn't matter if the being is physical or non-physical, everyone falls into one of these 4 categories. Everywhere in our universe of existence. The beings in group 3 are waking up. Some of them understand that the deception in one part of the universe infects all. It requires collective understanding to ensure that it will never happen again. The grand portal is the wall demolition. That's when the wall comes down through the efforts of all beings that are undergoing the sovereign integral process. And this makes it possible for all human beings to step forward into their infinite self, or life essence. There's many resources that are being used to create the crack in the wall. And then, from the inside, that's us, humanity, will push the wall down collectively and walk out of this prison. We're part of the crack. The number of people who show up to look through the crack in the wall will be very small. In terms of the whole population, a tiny fraction. But the real definition of the grand portal is that enough people will look through the crack and recognize there is more, much more, to reality's existence. And they will work collectively to push down the wall. When the wall falls, that will be when the infinite beings inside step out and operate the human instrument, not as a separate thing, not as a vessel or something they wear as a uniform, but they will operate inside the human body free of the interface and functional implants. This whole enslavement of humanity is like the 6 blind men touching the elephant. Many people are feeling parts of the elephant and describing the part they are touching, but with blindfolds on. It is very hard to describe the whole deception. They see parts of this enslavement and they know something is happening. Something isn't right. You can't have godlike beings walking around the earth coincident with murder, rape, child abuse, and war, and they don't feel this separation and deception. Something is terribly wrong. Why are we letting this happen? According to the wing makers, there are people who are incarnate now who would be the equivalent of outliers. This term outliers is typically used in statistics. Think of it like an anomaly. A person has what is called a transient malfunction to their interface, but in this malfunction, they are able to see through the crack. It might only last a second or two, but they glimpse what is behind the walls. And again, I'm not talking about the astral plane. That's just a more rarefied plane of the hologram of deception. People with these transient malfunctions often end up being diagnosed autistic, or in extreme cases are considered schizophrenic, but because the malfunction is transient, they slowly merge back into the human hologram and lack the contextual meaning of what they saw anyway. They learn to forget. The program draws them back in. But before they forget, before they return to normal beliefs, before they are drugged or quarantined, they share their experience to the unconscious mind. And this begins to express itself through culture. It'll come out in movies, books, theater, art, poetry, and many of these expressions will help to feed the unconscious mind and open it up to the possibility that the scale of our prison encompasses even the light, even science, even angels, even God. The wing makers refer to a new type of being called the sovereign entity. These are pre-sovereign integral beings, but they are seated with the capacity to step out of the hierarchy, and in doing so, they allow themselves to examine information that others would attack or ignore. Unfortunately, the information that will liberate people is the very information they are programmed to attack. If you look at everything in your world after this interview, you will see that our world is designed for a very specific function, and this function is to feel separation. It can be as obvious as the color of skin, gender, and different cultures, to the subtler distinctions between religions and spirituality. But the design is fractal, and it infuses everything in this world in this common unity I have called separation. Ironically, our unity is separation. Love is the unification force. It is only that, and yet, in many ways, that is everything. From the wing maker's perspective, it is a very important word concept, even though they use it sparingly. The 6 heart virtues I mentioned are considered the different ways in which love manifests in our behaviors. To this extent, love is expressed in these virtuous behaviors like gratitude, compassion, forgiveness, and humility. In that context, the 6 heart virtues collectively are the expression of love in the human dimension. When I express any of the heart virtues, I place them through the lens of oneness and equality. That's where they achieve their potency and expression. Then I take that experience and quite literally send it to my head region, imagining that experience is placed in the pineal gland in the center of the brain. This is my way of mailing it to everyone through the unconscious mind. If enough human beings awaken, if we begin to realize what's afoot, what plans are being made to further enslave us and ensure that we remain a part of the hologram of deception, life will move inside us and we can collectively stand up and stop this. But it has to be done in the right way, with honesty, forgiveness, and compassion. We have to model these behaviors as a collective entity. This is the definition of the grand portal. Separation is fractal energy. It infects everything within the hologram of deception to such a degree that it's not recognizable. No matter how well-intentioned a person or organization might be to convey true information, what often lurks behind the information is this fractal energy of separation and its use of comparison and judgment and all the other tools of separation that distill down to fear and unworthiness. How do we become aware of it? A person must understand that they are being programmed. That's a starting point. If you don't accept this basic premise, then why would you choose to change? If you do, then observe the programming inside you, within others in your environment, the larger world, and begin to see how subtle this programming is. In many ways, to observe this programming requires us to be neutral, so we can simply observe our internal states and the messages therein, as well as those of the external program, which come via television, the internet, email, newspapers, magazines, direct mail, and so on. It isn't critical that you know how every program is expressed into your life or what its esoteric meaning is. What's important is that you understand you are being programmed and you seek an internal source of direction, inspiration, and movement. The sovereign integral process is focused on you, the individual, directing your own self-life essence to express itself in oneness and equality. That's it. If you do this, then you are releasing the hold of the programming. For some, this can be done quickly, and for others, it might require more diligent practice. So can you do this as a Christian or whatever group you were raised in? I suggest that anyone who resonates with this information try it out. See how it moves them through their life path. If they want to remain in their current structure, see if elements of the sovereign integral process could be applied. But if you don't see separation in your current practices, then stay there because you won't have the motivation to be a practitioner. The process is all about change. Make no mistake about it. It is not selfish in any way. There is no burrowing into the bedrock of a belief system here that will make you feel superior or privileged or wise. There really is no belief system here other than the sovereign integral process. There is no structure, no organization, no master, no hierarchy. No one is above another or below another. This is not an organization of this world. It cannot be of this world, otherwise it is subject to separation. The only way the human 3.0 sovereign integral manifests is inside enough human beings who exemplify this process, who anchor this new consciousness of conduct on this planet and share it through their behaviors and unconscious mind. That's the only way, and not everyone is prepared to do that. So what happens if we see separation, but we don't have the motivation to make the changes in our behavior? The functional implants of the human 2.0 interface are seldom easy to release. They will hold on to your life essence as long as they can. They want to drive the human vessel, not hop in the back seat and watch as mere passengers. That's against their program. So how does this resistance manifest? I'm sure it's an individual thing. I don't pretend to know how it is for anyone else. I can tell you from my personal experience that I initially dived headfirst into this process and rearranged my life. I thought I was doing a good job, and then a week or two later, I found myself back to square one, exactly where I'd started. It felt like amnesia. It was as if I had forgotten. I was even doing a new practice. Admittedly, in my case, I had a lot of distractions in my life, but everyone can probably say the same thing. So I think this tendency to return to the habits of the consciousness system inside our 2.0 interface is the main way that resistance is expressed. Change of the scope is not an easy proposition. The human 2.0 mind doesn't like the back seat. So what do you do to return to the sovereign integral process? Well, for me, I needed to direct the techniques inward. I was directing the heart virtues outwards to others, but I wasn't turning them inward to myself. It dawned on me that the inward was probably the most important place to start. It takes great alertness to live and express in the now. Human beings have the tendency to live in our past memories or future concerns. This was what I was doing, and it took me from the now. And the now is where our life essence expresses. It isn't in the past or future. Only the consciousness framework pivots between past and future. So if you find yourself in there, you know you are not in your essence. When I realized this, I read from the Wingmaker's philosophy that breath was the magnet of nowness. It was the element that brought the human being into nowness by being aware of their breathing. I also learned that there were different kinds of breathing that enabled this sense of nowness to penetrate more vividly into the hologram of deception. The point is that simply being aware of my breath helped, as the Wingmakers put it, to center me in stillness. This, by the way, doesn't mean that you're in a quiet room. You can be in a meeting at work and center yourself in stillness through your breath. But by being in this internal centeredness, I was in a better position to feel my own sense of expression. And that's what was missing in my initial efforts to integrate this process. I didn't have a good starting point for my practice of the heart virtues, and I was directing them outward to other people or events, and not myself first. Once I made that adjustment, it helped me to identify my essence and distinguish it from my mind system. Life essence is authentic in oneness and equality and exclusively moves in nowness. The consciousness framework pivots between the past, present, and future and operates in separation. If you express the heart virtues from the consciousness framework, especially outwardly, they won't have the same potency or effect. Again, you need to start from the point of distinguishing your life essence in the now. Center yourself in nowness through being still and breath aware. Initially, this may take some time, but it happens quicker with practice. Thought patterns that connect you to separation need to be stopped. Behaviors, too. You can simply say, I've identified a behavior that supports separation in this world. Let's say I have believed that Muslims are less moral than atheists, and therefore less likely to get into heaven than someone who doesn't even believe in God. This is a belief or a thought form that relates to separation. I can say, stop that, but it's really not effective for most people. I can resist the belief every time it expresses itself in my life, but many of these beliefs are so subtle and subconscious that we don't even realize how they express themselves in our behaviors and choices. If you apply the heart virtues to yourself, like forgive yourself for having these perceptions, have some compassion for yourself that everyone is infected with these separation beliefs from their subconscious and unconscious mind layers, be humble that making this resistive alteration is not just about you, but in a way, it's about everyone, because we are one. Appreciate the fact that you're working on this for the good of all. Have valor that you can stand up and resist these separation complexes that lurk in your programmed consciousness framework. So is there really a God? The relationship is to a creator, not a God. The creator is in all life. God is more of a parent, and in religious circles a father figure who is humanized to such a degree that we can pray to God to give us things, help us remove obstacles, crush our enemies, and so on. Creator is aligned to oneness and equality, while God is aligned to separation and fear. First Source is the creator of life, the manifest reality of all existence. The Creator lives within life as the infinite spark that connects all life as equals in oneness. It is not here to be humanized. It cannot be humanized, or, for that matter, reduced to any other life form or thing. The Creator is the conjoining of all existence in the equality of oneness. And when that occurs, then God exists. As it is said in various religious texts that God created man in his image or likeness, and provided you understand Anu as God, then this is a reasonably true statement. However, the Creator created the infinite spark that animates the human form, and so the sovereign integral is the creation, and Anu had nothing to do with this. He merely figured out a way to enslave it. The last thing I'll say about the concept of God is that it's used by religions to separate ourselves from responsibility. It allows us to say, I'm not responsible for poverty or war or child abuse. There is a God who is much higher than us. God created the world. He is in charge. If He allows war and poverty, who am I to bear responsibility? The wrongdoers will pay in hell, and the tormented will reign in heaven. So God, or the concept of God, releases us from responsibility. The Creator, on the other hand, is not this way, because we're all bound in oneness, and what happens to one happens to all, and therefore we're all responsible for allowing separation to rule our behaviors. It's important to recognize the difference between the constructs of Creator and God, especially within the hologram of deception. The wingmakers have written that it isn't the protest that will change the enemy. If we shout at them and practice resistance with violence in the streets, they will only squash us. To bring their objective to a halt, we need to push down the wall, and we can do this by being practitioners of the sovereign integral process or anything similar. If human beings become self-aware, deprogrammed entities who understand specifically how we have been enslaved and for what reason, we can collectively push down the wall that separates us from our true selves. This creates a chain reaction that affects everyone, including the capstone of the elite. The wall falls for them too. It's using the consciousness of the life essence to reveal the human 2.0 consciousness as an invented reality. It's weaning from the hologram of deception to the reality that all life exists infinitely as equals in oneness. You can decide for yourself if what I say stands up to your scrutiny. I would just caution some to consider the possibility that, should you dismiss it, your rejection could be a programmed response. It is your consciousness framework that is sensing and responding. Consider this before you dismiss this information as fiction. If we remain in separation, we can't solve the problem of separation. If we remain in deception, we can't reveal anything of our true nature. So we need to see all as one and equal in the hologram of deception, and that includes the capstone of the elite as much as the poor and hungry. At the heart of this whole situation is a single reality, and that reality, as hard as it may be to touch, is that we are infinite beings. Everything that is of space-time is within the hologram of deception. Everything. Don't believe the programming that you are powerless. The sovereign integral process demonstrates that you are not merely a programmed life existence. So that pretty much wraps up the part I wanted to read with this whole 5th interview. Links are in the top pinned comment, as I mentioned earlier, and you can check this out for yourself. But leave your comments below. Let me know if this resonates with you, and if you feel like you could take part in pushing the wall down, opening this grand portal. So I appreciate you all listening. I'll see you in the next episode. Have a good one.